a few questions have been sent in on screen. I've been handed scribbled notes because Slido has a character limit. So the really big questions will come in a moment. I'm going to exercise chair's privilege and ask the first question.
Oh, good.
The book that everybody has been given, the book that you wrote with Greg Gilbert, What is the Mission of the Church? What year was that published? Can you remember?
I think 2011.
Okay. So obviously a huge amount has changed
Yes.
in the world since then. You
Yes.
said earlier that your concerns and questions haven't altered too much, but we've had COVID in the States, George Floyd, race is a hot button topic, sexuality questions have taken a particular turn over the last few years. Since 2011, are there any ways in which you would say today we are answering the question, what is the mission of the church, wrongly in 2024 that are different from how we were answering it wrongly in 2011? Do you see what I mean?
I do, yes. Excellent, very perceptive question. And I can answer most intelligently from my own context and hope that it translates here. So if I can speak in terms of left and right, I know you don't have just two political parties, it's much more confusing, and they don't, the political parties tend to map more discreetly and distinctly in the United States. But I would say here's one of the, if I can put the differences this way, I think the sorts of ways we saw the church wandering from the mission of the church in 2011 tended to be, I'll just say, left-wing concerns, where I think there's a new danger, at least in the States, with deviating from the mission of the church for right-wing concerns. What I mean by that is there's no doubt that the sort of things, the examples that are used in that book are humanitarian, NGOs, social justice, digging wells. There was that kind of energy. What are you doing to alleviate poverty? So that's still there, but you mentioned George Floyd, so that's one. We don't talk much about race, so that became and still is a very big, what are you doing to affect and overcome racial injustice? So that could be a big one. And then, there's a little bit about environmental concerns. But then when I mean on the right, I think certainly among conservative Christians in the States, and I've been right in the middle of a lot of these discussions, upsetting people all over the place, but if you don't know what time it is with all of these cultural changes and the trans issue and hardcore militant secularism, probably the kind that you would say, hey, welcome to the club. Although because the church is so much larger in the States, America's much more Christian, and there's just much more heat because you can't just I guess there's Christians in churches around somewhere. They're not as easily ignored. So I think because of that, there's just a lot of conflagration. So how might we be getting it wrong? I find myself now in my circles among conservative, Bible-believing, Orthodox Reformed Christians having to say, now wait a minute, I agree with you, I'm concerned about those transgender issues, I'm concerned about, critical theory, I'm concerned about cultural Marxism and all of those things, and yet, aren't you in danger of doing the same things now with a different set of issues, saying if the church isn't fully engaged in all of these issues, the church is being delinquent in its day. So I do think as Presbyterians, we have a helpful and overlooked doctrine, often misunderstood, of the spirituality of the church, which is right there in germinating form in the second book of Discipline, from the, 1580 something. I'm sure you've all read it. It comes from the Scots, thank you. But in the States, that has spirituality of the church has a lot of baggage because it was used by Southern Presbyterians to not deal with slavery. So it can be misapplied, but I think we need to do some better work to help Christians see there is something really right about that, to say the church as the church is not to make America great again. Whatever you think of Trump, it's not to reclaim the American culture. And I want America to be more Christian and think it's a loss when it's not. But that in itself is not to restore Christendom is not the marching orders of the church. So I think that's new, and at least I'm speaking from American perspective.
Okay.
But what I know I'm supposed to answer the questions, but what do you see? All of America sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold. What do you find those a new set of issues?
You've got too many questions, Kevin,
Okay,
for me
all right. Over lunch tomorrow. All right.
Yeah, that's right. Seriously, when I sat down with Kevin, there were 3 questions. Now there's about 20 have just been pinging in all the time. So I want to give people... where is this one? Here it is. It is common for churches today to have mission or vision statements. Do you think these cloud or clarify the mission of the church?
We have one. We have a mission statement. I'm wondering if I could remember to tell you what it is. It's something, I wrote it, I should remember, but it's something like...
Be a blessing.
Be a blessing. But our mission statement is not what we're sending out missionaries to do. So it's just a generic and humble reliance upon the Word of God and prayer. Christ's covenant exists to worship God, to love the body of Christ, to serve one another, and to glorify. Yeah, there's four things. So, and we go over it in our new members class. I think it's a helpful little hook. But I'm not. You can tell by the fact that I couldn't give it to you verbatim. I'm not of the mindset that they're essential to what churches do. I don't think they're bad, but I think churches can spend a lot of time perfecting the language and trying to say the right thing. And it's only helpful if it really shapes what you're doing. And often mission finds us more than we just state what our mission is. So I'm kind of ambivalent.
Okay. We'll come to the floor in just a moment. Here's one more question that was sent in. Should we as individual members of the church strive to do acts that are currently performed by parachurch organizations? And then the bite in the question, i.e., should we aim for the non-existence of parachurch organizations?
Mainly no. I'll answer that. I understand all the cautions with parachurch organizations and the dangers that the church succumbs to the parachurch to do what the church should be doing. But I'm not a parachurch hater. I work for a seminary that is a kind of parachurch. I think there are so I say no in the main because I think there are certain things that we call them parachurch or call them Christians, forming whatever your charitable designation over here would be. I actually think that can be wise, So we were talking about someone in our church who has a real heart for ministering to those with disabilities. And we do some of that in the church, and we're very glad to do it, and we want to do more of it just to care for our own people who have children or those with disabilities. But I think if we want to kind of be a ministry to our whole community for those with disabilities, I think it would be better for a few people of the church to partner together, form a separate charitable organization, have a separate board that the church can, maybe give some seed money to start and pray for. But I think it's actually better not to have everything that your people are into be clogged up under the final authority of the session. Obviously, as members, they're under the authority of the session. I just think I believe in seminaries, and I know they haven't always existed, but I think a seminary is, for example, going to be able to teach Greek and Hebrew and systematic theology and church history just better than virtually any church, even a church that's quite large like our church, let alone a sending agency to get you to the field. I just think that's going to be very, very difficult, and I'm thankful for people who can specialize in parachurches to come alongside the church.
Okay, so I know I said we'd come to the floor, but a question that kind of...
I'm always curious, do you agree? But we'll save that for later.
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We can move on.
Yeah, good.
How do you in your church encourage people to still be zealous in good works while keeping the disciple-making mission of the church clear?
Mm-hmm. So we have a big church, and its history a few decades ago, I think, was, and did a great thing, but was probably more of let 1,000 flowers bloom. And is that a Maoist phrase, though? But you got an idea? Sure, we'll make it a ministry of the church. We'll make it a ministry of the church. And I've wanted to move us away from that for all the reasons that I've explained here. So it's been hard conversations for some time. I am passionately pro-life. I've written lots of things about abortion. I pray about abortion. I know the whole topic functions differently here, but I mean, our people just about gave a standing ovation the Sunday after the Supreme Court case was overturned. So we care very much about it. Go ahead.
Does it seem strange to you that we don't seem to? Like, do you notice that over here?
Well, I'm not an expert, but having been to the UK, a dozen or more times and talked to a lot of people, I just know that it's not the live political issue. So I think, a little bit, but I just think it is, we have, for better or worse, we have one whole political party that says it's wrong and one whole political party that says it's right. So that if you want to understand why American politics are so polarized, you can't understand it apart from that issue. But I'm glad that at least there are lots of public voices who will say. So that I think that's why it is such a live issue that I think animates Christians in a particular way.
I think here the lack of it being such a political issue lets us as Christians hide, lets us keep our heads down, that it's not, the political parties aren't really fighting over it, so we don't do as much. I think it's one of the many areas we have a lot to learn from you guys, American brothers and sisters who've been incredibly courageous in that sort of area. Do you find... one of my follow-up questions that I was going to ask to that last one was that the doctor who's sitting here today, the nurse, the accountant, the teacher, the young mom with kids at home, what do you want them to take away from today with, what is the mission of the church is a lovely topic for pastors, like I said, who are trying to set vision for the future. What do you want all those folks to take away from today? What do you want today to do to them to help them?
Great question. Two things come to mind. One, I hope that all of those people you mentioned would think to themselves, how can I be engaged at some level in some way in the mission of the church? Which may mean that you go on your phone and you get the Joshua Project app that gives you a different unreached people group every day that you can pray about. It may mean, Lord, give me opportunities to give, think about going. Become a global-minded Christian. Pray for opportunities to share your own faith. So that whole way, there's lots of ways. But a second way is, I do hope that this removes what I think are unnecessary burdens. It's a different book that I've written. My most recent book is called Impossible Christianity, which is not about go do impossible things. That's a good message in a certain way. But it's about Jesus didn't give you a Christianity that he meant to be impossible. One of the things I've realized, authors only have one book. So I kind of have one, just do something, mission of the church, whole in our holiness, Impossible Christianity. All of them, in a way, are trying to say being a faithful Christian is harder and easier than you think. It's harder because you have to die to yourself, and you're a sinner, and I'm a sinner, and we like to sin. But it's easier. You don't have to have multiple degrees. You don't have to be an expert in 100 different things. You don't have to have 35 hours in a day. You can be a well-done, good and faithful servant by being a great mom to your kids. I mean, my oldest son is in second year at university. He is studying turf grass management. He wants to work on a golf course. I don't even golf. Isn't that terrible? Oh, all the Scots are like, really? He likes it. I don't even have a category for him. I want him to do like liberal arts education. I just keep saying, so do you, like, did Aristotle write about turf grass? Do you read the great books about? I think it's wonderful.
But you've got an amazing lawn now at home.
Yeah, everyone's saying, can you come over? I want him, if that's what he's going to do, to work to the glory of God, to have the best, golf course in North Carolina, and to be a great employee, or to serve, if he is a manager, to serve those well. I want him to be a great member at a local church, and to pray and lead a family someday, Lord willing, and to pray for missions and give his money. All those things that you say, well, I didn't have to spend a whole Saturday to get that. But sometimes we need to be reminded that actually is a life really well lived that God's pleased with.
Mm-hmm. And I know many of us will want to say thank you to that, Kevin, for that emphasis in your writings, in your ministry, that there are liberating threads. I know your most recent book, Impossible, has that in it particularly, and that's coming through today. That's really helpful. Thank you. Let's go to the floor. Anybody who hasn't sent in a question but has been waiting patiently to ask? Yes, Struan here. Right in the front. We'll take a couple of other questions from the floor after this.
Dr. Kevin DeYoung, I have heard every single word, and I hope I have digested it, especially about being a missionary. I am going to ask you one down-to-earth question.
Good.
How would you go about your front neighbor across the road, who is and his family, who are excellent in every way, but they are not Christians? And what would you do if one of your family is not a Christian? And I take your point about missionary, and I am not a missionary.
Yeah, right. But yes, so the question is about, you have a neighbor who's decent, good neighbor in all sorts of ways is not a Christian, or a family member is not a Christian. Yes, and I appreciate that. Absolutely, we want to be gospeling, we want to be bearing witness, we want to be sharing our faith with all of those people. Very practically, Rosaria Butterfield, who has an amazing testimony, but one of the things she's really good at, and we try to grow in, is hospitality. I think that's something that I would just stereotype. I think tends to be difficult for people like you, people like me. I mean, it's other kinds of cultures more immediately just welcome people, come over. So what she's really good at is have people into your home and continue to be a Christian. It doesn't have to be a bait and switch. I invited you over for pudding, and you're getting Calvin's Institutes. There you go. But simply to invite people over, and what we do before our meals is Love here always reads a chapter from the Psalms, and so he's going to do that, and then we say a prayer. Is there anything we could pray? I think to both be bolder and yet less pressured in how we talk. So, we've thought about, in our other house we'd have, We would have once a year, we organized a community neighborhood picnic and just got together with like the 4 other Christian families we knew. And so we put it on, and it wasn't a gospel event, it was a neighboring event. I think you start with engaging to get to evangelism. But, the church provided food, and so they thanked the church, and I opened with a prayer, and people knew I was a pastor, and I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself like I needed to go around to every table and pass out tracts, though some people would be very good at that, and wonderfully so, but as an opportunity to put a good foot forward. So, I do think when Jesus is obviously bold to share the gospel, yet it's people giving him permission in a way. He's in either a public setting where it's expected that he speak and teach, and Paul in the synagogue and in the marketplace, or somebody is asking him questions. So that's 1 Peter 3, be ready to give an answer for the hope that we have.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Any more from the floor questions? No? Okay. Kevin, this is the big one, 3:20. I need to read this out in full form. Okay, you have to work for your supper for this. Assuming that the mission of the Mosaic covenant people of God was to be a nation of priests and a light to the pagan nations, how do we, as God's new covenant people, relate to these promises and understand our mission as the people of the true Israel, Jesus Christ? You can see why that didn't fit in the character limit.
I'll try to be brief because it could be a whole class on covenant theology. So I think when we talk about Mosaic covenant to new covenant, first thing to understand is the Mosaic covenant is what is referred to as the Old Covenant, but the covenant line throughout Scripture contains more than just the Mosaic covenant. So typical Reformed covenant theology says there's one single covenant of grace with several different administrations, and from Noahic and Abrahamic. So the new covenant replaces the Mosaic covenant. That's very plain. That's clear. The Mosaic covenant is obsolete as a national covenant for God's people. So I know you have an illustrious history of covenanters, and so a certain understanding of covenant, which some people in America share. But people can do that. They made a decision to covenant themselves as a people. But as God's covenanted national people, it is now a covenanted international people. So the Mosaic covenant is obsolete as a national law covenant. But the new covenant doesn't obliterate all the rest that comes before. So I would argue the new covenant is really a recapitulation of the Abrahamic covenant, is a clearer expression of that. So we always have to talk with similarities and dissimilarities, continuity and discontinuity. So I think a point of continuity is, like ancient Israel, we are to be a kingdom of priests. That's a promise explicitly given to the church and applied to the church in 1 Peter chapter 2. So we are to be a holy nation, not as an ethnic group, but now as a spiritual group gathered around Jesus. So there still is that people ought to see your good deeds and glorify God in the day he visits us. We do shine as a light. And yet now, as I said, I think one of the things that's new in the new covenant is a going out, not just a light, not just a beacon. So if you have a lighthouse on the shore, it's to tell the ships where to go and how to get into the harbor. So it's not just a light that stands there, though we have that, we're a lampstand, but a light that also goes. So gathered and scattered, I think when it comes to mission is one of the differences. There's lots more we could talk about with the law and the covenant, but probably stick to the mission of the church unless you want to double down on anything else.
No, that's excellent. That's a really good answer. Thank you. 2 last questions, because time's going to beat us. Another theological another theological one, and then one that could either be fun or controversial, depending on how you answer it. So more theological one. Can you explain more clearly the distinction between church as organism and organization? You used that phrase in one of the talks. What's the distinction between church as organism and organization, and how does that distinction relate to mission?
Mm-hmm. So I think you do see both the church, one way to say is the church gathered and the church scattered. So where is the church? On Sunday morning you can go, there's churches, there's buildings, and you go and there's the church. I think people get bent out of shape and stop saying we go to church because you are the church. Well, church doesn't actually, the word is not derived from ecclesia, it's derived from the word kuriake, which means belonging to the Lord, from which you get kirk. And so a building that is dedicated to the Lord in that way, I think we're right to call it a church. It's good to say we go to church, and we are the church. So gathered or institution is a church that has officers, has sacraments, has discipline, has membership. There's an inside, there's an outside. That's what we mean by the institution of the church. We can't and we wouldn't want to do away with the institution of the church. Spiritual, not religious, usually means I just want to make it up as I go along. But the church is organism, meaning the church doesn't just exist only on Sunday morning and Sunday evening. That's why sometimes people have said, well, if your church, if your church just disappeared, would anybody miss that it's gone? And I think sometimes that's said, like, if your church isn't doing, homeless ministry or all these things we've been talking about, that nobody would miss you if you're gone. I want to say, well, they would miss that person who's a doctor, and that person who's a great teacher, and that person who plumbs out there, and that person who does the glass work in the building, and that person who watches the kids in the So yes, that too is the church. It's not one over against the other. And to those who just think of, well, me and my mate are praying together at a Pret, contextualization. Well, that's good, but that's not a church. On the other hand, we don't want to think that this is just the church as it exists in these four walls and nothing else. Okay, fun question or controversial?
Do you think that Presbyterians should support Presbyterian missions only and Baptists support only Baptist missions? Oh, it's been answered.
Mainly, not only.
Okay. So which route are we going down, fun or controversial?
Well, I would say this. Maybe I think about what we do. We do not support any Baptist church plants. We support, some that would be Westminster or maybe Three Forms of Unity, Reformed church plants. So I guess if that's what we mean, if, however, it means do we partner with people in other sorts of organizations that are broader than just Presbyterian? Yes, we do. Or, work at a seminary that is Reformed, but employs Baptists and teaches Baptists. Or we might partner with a ministry that's, executive director as a Baptist. So we're not using that as such a such a tight front door that we wouldn't support. But yes, we do say that, and Mark Dever, a good Baptist friend of mine, I know is not church planting to plant Presbyterian churches. It doesn't mean that it's in our denomination, but yeah, we're going to say we love Baptists and we're happy for them to support, but if we're looking at the sort of churches that we want to plant and establish, they're going to be Reformed or Presbyterian. So
you're saying to your Baptist friends, you follow the Lord in your way, we'll follow him in his. That way? Yeah,
I think we have lots of unconstructed Baptists at our church. Who you don't have to be a Paedo-Baptist to join. It's kind of nice. We allow that. Most of the Baptists don't allow it going the other way. Understand their consistency there. But, I don't think someone would say, it just wouldn't even get off the ground if they said, I'm going to plant a Baptist church in Ukraine. Would you partner with us? Sure. I think maybe we'd say, here's a one-time gift. We love you, brother, but that's not going to be a long-term, partnership that we're going to affect.
Listen, this is really stimulating.
That seems more controversial than fun.
That's okay. You're among friends. We can cope with it. We can cope with it. Yeah. It's really stimulating. I think the type of questions, you've clearly got lots of us thinking about lots of things. So I want to say thank you. And I'm going to draw stumps there so that, Kevin, you can do your final session. Yeah.